The Romans were using caltrops as early as 2,000 years ago. Why are they so feared? Since horses were domesticized, they became an integral part of battles. Infantry soldiers are hardly a match for armed riders.
The problem for infantry when they face cavalry is the speed with which the cavalry move and the weight they bring to contact.
The impact of a cavalry attack can decide the fate of an entire war.
And it takes a lot of discipline to make foot soldiers stand when they're being charged by horsemen.
The mobility and speed of cavalry attacks pose problems. Ancient military leaders are trying to find more efficient weapons to counter the attacks. A tool known as the caltrop proves to be an ingenious solution. Weapons expert Mike Loades wants to take a closer look at the small weapon. How were caltrops deployed on the battlefield?
Well, this vicious matrix of iron spikes, it's called a caltrop. And they were used on the ancient and medieval battlefield in their thousands, scattered all over the field. The thing about them is that when you throw them, they land, spike up. They're always going to land with one of these spikes sticking up. So anybody walking through long grass can't see this, and their foot drives through the spike. This one's got a barb, so very difficult to get out. Vicious against horses, kind of medieval minefield.
On horseback, soldiers can hardly see the caltrops. If used correctly, they can cause deep injuries for both humans and animals.
Je schwerer, desto tiefer bohrt sich diese.
The heavier, the deeper the spikes drive into the skin. This is particularly dangerous for cavalry horses. And of course, speed plays into it. If I'm moving fast, the spike is going to impale the foot or the hoof, and that immobilizes you.
Dann kann man sich erstmal gar nicht weiter bewegen.
217 CE, Roman infantry soldiers are fighting the heavily armed Parthian riders in the Battle of Nisibis. As the horsemen gallop towards them, the Romans fake a retreat and scatter triboli on the battlefield, the Roman version of the caltrop. They consist of 4 sharp iron spikes. Roman triboli have barbs, which are less common on their medieval counterparts.
In those situations, the caltrop can be very useful to control the terrain. You can create dead ground where no one can go, and that can prevent a flanking attack or the enemy coming round behind. So the caltrop is useful to control the ground.
Triboli slow down cavalry attacks in the most insidious and efficient manner, often causing great losses for both men and horses. Triboli or caltrops are easy to make. Every blacksmith can forge them. Jens Christiansen shows us how. He only has to heat a piece of iron that has been prepared beforehand, bend the ends to achieve the intended form, and forge the spikes. That's it. The defensive weapon is ready for use.
What a terrible, terrible thing. So this is the Roman version, the tribulus. The barbs are intimidating. If that goes through your foot, or certainly a horse's foot, that man is out of action, that horse is out of action forever. So by the Middle Ages, they had dispensed with these barbs, and the tribulus became the caltrop. It's the same thing, different name, but without the barbs.
Triboli are part of the standard equipment of the Roman legions. For horses, stepping on a caltrop usually marks their doom. The most important animals in military history are particularly vulnerable along the underside of their hooves. Horses play a decisive factor in winning wars through to the 20th century. German forces alone lost about 1.5 million horses during World War I. Ever since men have been waging wars, animals have been among the victims. They are often the first ones to die. be it in the front lines or when transporting weapons, ammunition or food.
Cannon siege engines have been pulled by oxen rather than by horses. And the great advantage of the ox is when he's finished his job, you can eat him. So animals are also a critical part of the food chain, and the fact that they're mobile means it's easier to move an animal food supply than it is a vegetable food supply, which needs animals to tow it.
Even elephants are used in World War I. The most famous of them is a lady. In Sheffield, Lizzie takes over the work from the horses in the steel industry after those have been deployed to the front lines. Hannibal's legendary crossing of the Alps was accompanied by 37 elephants. To this day, it remains unclear how many of them froze to death or fell down the mountain slopes. Dogs are also deployed to the front lines in World War I. Most of them serve as watchdogs, detection dogs, or rescue dogs. They play a crucial role for the troops. A short moment with the animals can already have a huge impact on the soldiers' morale. Stubby, a Boston and Bull Terrier mix, becomes famous. He saves his regiment from mustard gas attacks, finds artillery grenades and wounded soldiers. To this day, animals are used in the military. Sea lions and about 70 dolphins are currently serving in the US Navy. Their mission, finding mines and enemy combat divers. They undergo special training to learn how to mark and report their targets. Their great military value often makes animals a target for the enemy. For horses, stepping onto a caltrop often means receiving the coup de grace. In battle, soldiers neither have the time nor sympathy for a wounded animal. Mike Loades wants to find out if caltrops are really that easy to deploy.
And what I want to find out is, in a field of caltrops, what's the Russian roulette? What's the chance of a cavalryman getting through? We've got these sponges soaked in blue paint, and I'm going to hide them in the grass here so the horses can't see them. Get them well covered.
Mike Loades distributes our dummy caltrops across a staked-off plot.
If you were doing it in the Middle Ages, you would just simply be throwing them out as you walk back. You could get it done really quite quickly.
At top speed, 4 horsemen will try to cross the field unharmed.
You can also see underneath on a horse's foot how vulnerable it is. Look, this is soft. This is where the spike of a caltrop would go in. Really cruel weapon.
Can the horses cross the whole area at full speed and escape unscathed?
Action!
Caltrops are invisible to a galloping horse and its rider. In our experiment, of course, we make sure no animal is harmed. The worst that can happen are some color stains. But in war, stepping on a caltrop would mean game over for the horse, and often also for the rider.
Okay, let's have a look. I can see straight away that Absalom has fallen victim to a caltrop. Look at that. You can see the streak of blue down his leg. The horse would be down, the rider would be thrown, they're out of the battle. Look at that. On his hind leg, this horse as well has stepped on a sponge, which means he would have stepped on a caltrop. Look at that. That's... Even being this wet, I think there'd be a trace. So maybe you survived. Nothing here. Both hooves are clean. But that's 2 horses out of 4 in that one run got struck by caltrops. Imagine if you're in a cavalry charge and your fellows go down and you know, the cry would go up, caltrops! It would take a brave man or a foolish man to ride their horse through there. That's Russian roulette.
Our experiment has shown there is no protection against a caltrop attack. Nevertheless, The weapon can harm both friend and foe. One of the few historical depictions of documenting the use of caltrops is a mural in the chapel of Schönenbuchen in southern Germany. It depicts mercenaries on a raid in the Black Forest in 1444. Farmers are trying to stop them with caltrops.
You put baskets of caltrops on a mountain pass that's the only way to get to your town, then you decimate an army before it arrives. You put baskets of caltrops through a woodland causeway, then you cause chaos in an attacking army. You don't even have to fight them.
Are there only just a few historical depictions of caltrops because they are considered dishonorable weapons? Regardless, over the course of history, millions of them have been manufactured. And the ingenuity of medieval weapon engineers will bring more ideas to light.
The caltrop is a silent assassin. It hides and waits for its victims. But sometimes it's used more actively. We actually have evidence of caltrops in clay pots, pots that could be dropped from the height of city walls or castles. But you would think that once the pot's smashed and these caltrops are on the ground, everyone would know where they were. They would know it was a minefield. But there was something else in the pot.
When the pots break, not only caltrops cover the battlefield. The result is one of the first chemical weapons of history.
The other ingredient in the pot of caltrops was quicklime. Quicklime's used in building materials, mortar, cement. This is it when it's set. This is now inert. But before it's inert, it's a very, very dangerous substance in powder form. That's why, for this demonstration, we're using flour, not the real thing. Quicklime is made from crushed seashells and limestone that are then heated to a very, very high temperature. And then you get this substance that reacts with water, reacts with any moisture, and it has a rapid acceleration in temperature, and it burns like acid.
The clay pots filled with caltrops proved to be a particularly efficient defensive weapon in sieges.
You got it?
Good.
Sometimes medieval defendants used in the upwards of several hundred clay pots.
This was really quicklime. It would be a scene of true terror. This dust would be getting down the back, behind your armor. You couldn't get at it. It would be getting in your eyes. Everything would be stinging, and you would be blinded.
Quicklime is completely caustic for humans. It's basically an acid and causes extremely bad chemical burns. It's also highly flammable, so if in addition to the caltrops and quicklime you add other highly flammable substances, you can effortlessly make it all catch fire.
This stuff, if it's quicklime, touching the moisture in your eyes would burn your eyes out, and you could not see, and you would stand on the caltrops.
This always caught the enemy off guard, slowed down attacks on the battlefield, or prevented them altogether. The fact that caltrops are so easy to manufacture makes them a cheap and mass-produced defensive weapon. They remain important even when motor vehicles are introduced. Modern caltrops and their variations, like spike strips, destroy car tires even today. Police all around the globe use them. They are one of the few weapons in history that have been deployed almost unaltered since the Roman era. The introduction of new weapons technology frequently results in fatal errors and avoidable massacres, especially at the beginning of World War I.
When the First World War broke out in 1914, the great armies of Europe thought that they would maneuver in a classical form using cavalry and infantry. They would set up set-piece battles in which whole armies engaged on a broad front. It rapidly became clear that firepower, both artillery firepower, infantry firepower, and particularly the machine gun, made it impossible for men to operate as they had in even 50 years before.
Machine guns and improved artillery claim high losses on both sides. Attacks without cover ultimately end as a bloodbath. After the devastating Battle of the Marne, both sides start digging. By the end of November, a continuous line of trenches runs all the way from the North Sea to Switzerland. Mobile warfare has turned into trench warfare. But what is the best way to effectively attack the enemy's narrow and hard-to-see trenches and bunkers? Artillery becomes a key weapon. The only way to defeat an enemy down in a trench is with ballistic fire. On both sides, a dense row of guns is positioned far behind the trenches. William Mills, an engineer in Birmingham, develops a new weapon for the trench soldiers. In 1915, the Mills bomb makes its way onto European battlefields. Mills' invention is no new idea. In the 16th century, transporting cannons is a problem. The soldiers need a lightweight weapon that can wreak havoc without too much effort. And the hand grenade is born.
The shape of these very early grenades resembles a pomegranate, hence the name.
The round, hard-skinned and many-seeded fruit becomes the namesake for the new weapon in the 17th century. A hollow clay jar is filled with gunpowder and metal slivers. A fuse ignites the explosive, and the sharp metal and clay fragments make their destructive impact.
17th and 18th century armies had elite soldiers called grenadiers who were generally big, tall fellows who could throw a grenade a long way.
They also changed their uniforms. These typical pointed Prussian hats, the grenadier hats, were made to look like this because, of course, if you were wearing a two-pointed hat, it would be a lot more difficult for you to throw a grenade.
With their hand grenades, the grenadiers stand at the ready on the front lines. But the weapon also has its pitfalls.
The grenade had to be lit. If the fuse went too quickly, the grenade would blow up before it was thrown. If it got dropped or anything like that, things could go wrong. And of course, if it was raining, it probably wouldn't work. So it was a rather temperamental weapon.
During the American Civil War, the next generation of hand grenades reaches the battlefields. An invention from William Ketchum eliminates the need to manually ignite the weapon. The grenade only needs to hit the impact fuse in the nose of the weapon in order to explode.
If the bomb lands on its side and doesn't detonate, then it stays relatively safe for a period of time. So, of course, the opponent can then take the grenade and throw it back to where it came from.
The latest hand grenade in 1915 is supposed to solve this problem. With historian Stephen Bull, we take a closer look at William Mills' invention. It has considerable advantages over its predecessors. It does not need to be manually ignited, and there is no unreliable impact fuse. The grenade is constructed using a perforated cast iron shell and filled with explosives.
The hand grenade was an old idea, but it received a new lease of life in the trenches of the First World War. The effect of an explosion in a confined space could be devastating.
The functioning principle of the hand grenade is that in the middle there's a fuse connected to the explosive charge. If the safety pin is pulled and the lever is released, then the tension of the spring hits the striker to ignite the fuse. 7 seconds later, it explodes. Combining portability with destructiveness, the hand grenade becomes a standard weapon during World War I. On the fronts of Flanders and France, an ingenious trench system is developed. A support trench is dug behind the main trench, connected to another passage known as a communication trench. The enemy is anywhere from 30 to a few hundred meters away, and the soldiers call the area separating the two sides no man's land. Hand grenades that land in a trench are terrifying, but changes to trench construction alleviate their devastating effects.
If a trench is straight, then shrapnel can fly far in one direction and potentially hit soldiers. So they thought if they dug the trenches in a zigzag shape, there would always be a corner nearby where a soldier could hide. And then shrapnel would only fly to the next corner and get stuck in the wall, and hopefully it wouldn't hit anyone.
Soldiers that are hit by fragments of a hand grenade often suffer life-threatening injuries. An effective drug to prevent gangrene has not yet been invented.
One of the key problems in trench warfare is the secondary infection following wounds because of the contaminated and dangerous nature of the ground that you're fighting over.
Sludgy ground, overflowing latrines, unwashed bodies, and decomposing corpses. Everyday life in the trenches is yet another burden for soldiers during the war.
They had to wear their clothes all the time, and worse still, they also had to keep their boots on. That meant the conditions were ideal for fungus to grow, and bacteria also grew. And the skin became really macerated and stayed moist and was quite fragile and very vulnerable.
The lack of hygiene makes it virtually impossible to treat hand grenade injuries in the trenches.
These fragments often had very small particles, so that meant even if you had a tiny wound, it could easily become inflamed because of unhygienic conditions. And if you didn't have the right medication, then you could go from barely having a wound at all to having a serious injury that gets infected. And the infection can then spread to lymph vessels, to blood vessels, and can even lead to blood poisoning.
If a shrapnel wound does heal, it's only a matter of time before the next attack. In 1917, the British Mills bomb goes into mass production. The Germans are also developing their own completely different hand grenade. While Mills grenades look like an egg, the German version is at the end of a wooden stick. And it functions differently. The British hand grenade is a fragmentation weapon, but the Germans have created an explosive weapon. With historian Stephen Bull, we want to explore the differences between these two types of grenade. The head of the stick grenade holds over 100 grams more explosive material than the egg version. The difference is the force of the explosion, not the radius of the projectile fragments, but it needs to have pinpoint accuracy. The German grenade's wooden stick is supposed to help with the aim.
So these are the two grenades that we'll be testing. They're both time-fused models. This one is the Soviet F1, a similar design to the Mills. This one is the German M24, steel hand grenade or stick grenade. Different philosophies, but is one better than the other? And why?
Which grenade will Stephen Bull be able to land closer to his target in just one throw? He tries out the Mills bomb first.
Quite small in the hand, like a large egg, really. Pull the pin, and we're ready to go.
The grenade lands about 5 meters from the target.
Not bad, a reasonable throw, but it's a little short of the target. The main effect from this, of course, would be the fragmentation.
Does throwing the stick grenade give a better result? It lands directly on our target.
So that was a good long throw, all the way to the target. It seems that that long stick gives you a bit of extra leverage for a long throw.
The explosion would have dangerous consequences for the enemy, but the sharp fragments of the egg hand grenade would also be devastating.
The M24 gave me a longer throw because its handle gave me greater leverage. But this was a weapon for blast, essentially a weapon for use in the open. The Soviet F1 is perhaps a little handier, but not quite such a long throw. Its main effect was fragmentation, and preferably in enclosed areas. So these are both good grenades, but they're designed for different purposes.
Both types of hand grenade make their mark in World War I. To a lesser extent, they continue to be used during World War II.
The Second World War is not such a great war for the hand grenade because wars tend to be now much more mobile, much more fluid. There are still trenches and bunkers to be cleared, but they're only part of rather than the whole of the war.
During World War I, 300 million hand grenades are produced by the German side alone, followed by 70 million in World War II. But the repercussions of their use remain the same. Those who survive a shrapnel wound often must resort to amputation to avoid death by gangrene. For decades, researchers have sought in vain to find a cure for gangrene. In 1928, Scottish bacteriologist Alexander Fleming accidentally discovers that pathogens no longer multiply when in close vicinity to a mold fungus. Fleming, together with biochemist Ernst Chain and pathologist Howard Florey, over the ensuing years worked to finally develop the first antibiotic, penicillin. The active ingredient prevents growing bacteria from completing their cell walls, effectively stopping them from spreading. Testing proves that the new drug is effective, but the British government is not ready to start the costly production. After joining the war, the United States step in and start mass production in 1942.
The need for penicillin at the front led to it becoming a top priority for the pharmaceutical industry. And they actively pushed this research because it was also a huge market for them.
The antibiotic is America's second most important project after the atomic bomb. Large advertisements proclaim, "Thanks to penicillin, he will come home." The Germans and Russians don't have access to the drug yet, and as a result, high numbers of their men die from infection. A strategic advantage for the Allies.
People don't die of disease, they get killed in battle. Whether that's morally uplifting or morally bankrupt, I don't know, but it does change the way that wars look. Wars are now about men dying in battle, and that's slightly easier to sell because it's heroic to die in battle. It's not heroic to die of diphtheria.
After the war, the expensive research also benefits the civilian population, and the advancement soon reaches the entire world. It's one case in which progress is accelerated by war.
What we're looking at is advancing on twin tracks. We're finding new ways of killing people in confined spaces and giving them horrific injuries which may become contaminated. At the same time, we're finding ways of dealing with those contaminations and healing people.
And for all armies, the hand grenade continues to be standard issue equipment. After 1945, it is used in practically every armed conflict.
Continues to be a very useful means of doing a job that nothing else does. You have a system of fighting in which you're going into individual buildings and clearing individual rooms, and the hand grenade is still the weapon of choice to clear the room.
A hand grenade is also developed for police without the fatal fragments. With a loud bang, blinding light and dense smoke, stun or smoke grenades are hurled at criminals and even demonstrators. Their use is controversial. A legendary version of the thrown weapon owes its name to Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov. During the Russo-Finnish War of 1939, Finnish soldiers used gas-filled bottles against their Soviet attackers, calling them Molotov cocktails, as an allusion to their opponent's propaganda.
The original hand grenade was a homemade bomb, and the Molotov cocktail is a later version of the homemade bomb. And it's a classic solution to the problem of resistance against armed force when you have no weapons. You have to make a weapon out of something that isn't a weapon. And throughout history, human ingenuity has resulted in the conversion of perfectly ordinary things into weapons in times of need.
Throwing something at the enemy, a reflex as old as mankind. "2,000 years ago in Greek, Roman and other armies, slingers are in high demand. Yet only a few pieces of evidence has been handed down about this simple range weapon. Dating back to the 2nd century AD, this relief on Trajan's column depicts Iberians using slings, an indication of their great importance during the era of the Roman Empire.
In ancient battles, the use of the sling was quite common, and the sling was used in much the same way as muskets and rifles in early 18th century, 19th century warfare.
Our expert, Mike Loades, is headed to Denmark. In a historic village, he wants to discover the secret of this almost forgotten ancient superweapon.
The sling is possibly the earliest weapon that gave man mechanical advantage. What it did was it extended the length of his arm. It made them longer levers, so you could throw with more speed and more force.
During the Stone Age, slings are used for hunting, and later their specific snapping sound can be heard on the battlefield. An ancient sling is between 60 to 100 centimeters long and made up of braided plant fibers. Its projectiles weigh between 30 to 250 grams. These stones, located in modern-day Turkey, are some of the earliest evidence of the sling. They date back to around 8,500 years ago.
In expert hands, the sling's a really powerful weapon. It was a breaker of heads and a smasher of bones. And the best slingers came from the Balearic Isles. They were sought after by all the ancient armies, the Greeks, the Romans, the Carthaginians. Legend has it that the mothers of children in the Balearic Isles would not let them eat, would not give them their food until they could hit it with a sling. There is such a cultural tradition there, and it lasts today. Even today, the best slingers come from the Balearics.
Talented slingers are celebrated stars in the Balearic Islands. On Mallorca, in Sao Paulo, the Slinging World Championship takes place every year. Not surprisingly, the best slinger in the world is also from the Balearic Islands. Luis Pons Livermore is a multiple-time champion and will support us with our experiments.
You have different parts, the ring where you put the finger, the pouch where you put the stone or whatever, and the final it is the tail that have two functions. One is the crack, make a noise.
Like a whiplash?
Yeah, like a whip. And the other one, forget precision.
But if this snaps like a whip, that means this is going incredibly fast. I mean, this is a high-speed weapon, isn't it? I mean, you can throw a rock, but when you throw it with this, then it becomes a bullet.
An important factor for speed is known as the band. The longer it is, the faster the projectile will launch. The part in the middle is known as the pouch.
You're making the divide here, which is this part of the sling, which is critical.
Yeah. let's have these two parts exactly the same.
The world champion slinger knows exactly how to make the weapon himself. The plant fibers are extremely resistant to tearing.
How old were you when you made your first sling?
Probably 10 years old.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beginning, 10, 11.
You would never throw with someone else's sling. There's a pride in making your own sling.
No, all the slings are different.
With practice movements, Lewis finishes his sling in less than 30 minutes.
That's fantastic. It was so quick. It seems so easy, but it's elaborate.
During ancient wars, slingers are used in a variety of ways. In Caesar's time, a typical Roman battle formation is made up of heavily armed legionnaires arranged into blocks on the battlefield. Each block, known as a cohort, consists of close to 500 soldiers. Those with slings are placed in between the individual blocks, as well as in the front rows.
And once the battle starts, you could have the elite slingers, like the Balearic slingers, you could have them in the front line, men who can aim accurately, men who could target a general on a horse at 300 meters. But you could also use regular slingers behind ranks of archers, because the sling has got a greater range than the bow and arrow. And these men would be throwing high in the air, bringing down a tempest of stones falling on the heads of the enemy.
In addition to the Balearic snipers, less well-trained men with slings also play a key role. But how difficult is it to master the weapon? We want to find out in an experiment with 3 amateurs. For safety reasons, tennis balls will be used instead of stones.
The ring goes in the middle finger. You put it like this, and it's hanging out of your hand, okay? You pick the tail, and you close it in your hand like this, okay, soft. And you see the pouch, you have to be the same level, all right? When you have this, you have to put the tennis ball just on top. Once you get the body position and you have the sling in your hand, you spin it 3-4 times. You have to pull your arm, and when you pull your arm, you have to get close the tail. So having a sling is like having a long arm. For example, if you're going to pass the ball like this and it's going to go out, it's the same. You have to get the movement to pull it front and open your hand forward.
Their target, a tin can 10 meters away. Who scores on their first try? For world champion Lewis, it's a piece of cake.
No pressure.
No pressure.
The amateurs have a hard time with their slings. Accurate shots are a rare exception.
It's harder than I thought, because my balls were all over the place. So, I don't know. In 10 years, I might be as good as him.
Even in ancient times, years of training are what distinguishes the snipers from just another soldier with a sling.
There's a lot of debate around how long it takes to become an expert in something, and there's figures around from 20 hours up until 10,000 hours. But what we do know simply is that the more you practice something, the better you become at it, even if you're not naturally good at something.
A sling is simple to make and can be mastered through training, making it the weapon of ordinary people. A message that can also be found in the Old Testament. In the famous story of David and Goliath, a small Israeli boy faces a massive Philistine warrior. The young shepherd reaches into his satchel, takes out a stone, and slings it to hit the giant in the forehead.
This tells us everything about the sling. It's a leveling weapon. It allows somebody who is not of elite status, doesn't have all the elite equipment of armor, sword and horse, to do something really significant on the battlefield.
Even today, the sling can still be highly symbolic, such as when Palestinians stand up to Israeli soldiers with slings. David versus Goliath, an age-old tradition of the Holy Land.
So it's almost like a, despite what you've got, we are stronger than you. We have got more resilience than you. And that weapon almost symbolizes that resilience.
Long ago, and today as well, mainly stones are used as ammunition, available anywhere. But not every stone is suitable.
But they have to be a uniform shape. It's no good me picking up these stones.
No, nothing.
Because they will throw all over the place.
All over the place, they will not go in a straight line. Maybe you can lose it when you go spinning.
So you have to either find stones that are a nice even shape,
yeah,
or you have to
make them.
This kind of prepared stone projectile weighs about 200 grams. What kind of impact does it have? 15 meters away, a wooden and tin target is set up for a test. The sling's characteristic whip crack noise is heard every time that the back part of the sling breaks the sound barrier during the shot. The sound wave of the sling band gets faster and faster as it continues to the slack end, where it reaches twice the speed of sound.
You've just eaten that shield. Stone after stone, just eating away. And you were doing it over and over again. It's a very rhythmic action.
Yeah, if you have the point, you have to keep shooting at the same time.
Look at the impact on the metal. I mean, it's a terrifying weapon. Terrifying weapon. I mean, those stones, I mean, that's going to kill you. That speed that you're throwing with that whip crack force, whether you're wearing armor or not, that's if it hits you in the head, it's certainly going to kill you.
Yeah, obviously.
How fast does the stone projectile travel when it's shot by our champion Luis? We test the speed with a high-precision digital meter. But in order for a measurement to be made, Luis needs to shoot directly through the opening. Success, but what speed did the stone reach?
52 meters per second. So that's 186, 187 kilometers per hour. Pretty fast.
A sling can accomplish top speeds, but precise aim is difficult, especially in combat.
Ancient slings weren't precision instruments, partly because of the material they were made from. The smallest change of angle would cause an extreme change to your trajectory.
A delay of just 0.2 of a second before release can result in a deviation of 30 degrees in the projectile's trajectory. To increase their hit rate, ancient warriors choose projectiles that are as uniform as possible. These kind of standardized lead projectiles were produced more than 2,000 years ago.
So we've got two very different missiles here. We've got, the heavy rock and the Roman glandis, which is Latin for acorn, and you can see that's an acorn shape.
Lead projectiles, known as glanders by the Romans, can be produced at any campfire, since lead melts at a temperature of 328 degrees centigrade. The lead projectiles often also contain a message as a kind of sarcastic note to the enemy. On this one it says in Greek letters, "Take that." The tradition of writing on projectiles continues to this day. During World War II, Allied aircraft crews decorate their bombs with greetings to the Germans. In two wars against Iraq, Americans addressed their bombs to Saddam Hussein.
Them taking some small psychological step to give them a message. They're probably not going to necessarily see that message, but it gives that person a sense of being able to demonstrate the anger they feel inside, the emotion that they've got inside, what they want to say to that person. So by putting it on the weapon, it almost makes them feel a little bit of satisfaction.
In war, it can also help to personalize your weapon by giving it a name.
That's why people used to name their weapons and sent some sort of greeting along with them. Swords are supposed to be magical. And when they named their swords Iron Eater or Long and Sharp, I suppose the name alone meant to say it all.
In the ancient world and during the Middle Ages, swords take on mythical qualities. In modern times, soldiers often feel that they have a special relationship with their firearms, which they show by taking extra care of them. Behind this desire, there is a need to preserve something personal in the midst of what can often seem to be an inhuman war. A miracle weapon may also be called upon for extra help when it comes to matters of life or death. Our next experiment tests the effect of a sling on a hypothetical enemy. World champion Lewis slings stones at a realistic leather skin dummy block. Our camera records the moment of impact.
Look at that, and we could see how hard it hit by how far it has bounced back. Here it is. I mean, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 6 meters from where it hit. So that was a tremendous impact, and you hit him right over the heart. That would have smashed his ribs and stopped his heart.
Yeah.
Next up, we try the lead-cast glanders. How well can the smaller sharp-edged projectiles penetrate the dummy?
Look at this, Lewis. That is chilling. It's actually in there. You actually got it inside the man. This has gone through and embedded deep inside. That is a weapon.
Slingers appear again and again in world history. In this 14th century depiction from the Middle Ages, they are shown next to archers. During their conquest of the Incan Empire, Spain is confronted with warriors bearing slings.